Specificity is really hard to say, but it could be crucial to your success in improving your writing. This is a term that I've borrowed from the sports science world, although I imagine it's used in other areas as well, and I am probably not the first person to borrow it. Basically, it comes down to this. If you want to get better at doing X, then your practice/training should resemble X as much as possible. X being the app that used to be Twitter. On the surface, this makes a lot of sense. If you want to get better at baseball, science tells us the best thing to do is practice playing baseball. And the more specific we get, the better. It's not good enough just to practice baseball. If you want to pitch, you should practice pitching. If you want to play third base, you should practice playing third base. If you want to get better at fielding pop flies, then you should yield top fries. I'll now add a cricket analogy for my non-North American viewers. If you want to get better at cricket, you should practice cricket. That's as specific as I can get, I'm sorry. Does this translate to writing, specifically fiction writing? I kind of struggle to see how it wouldn't. If you want to be writing humorous romance novels set in 18th century Wales, then it makes sense that the more time you spend writing humorous romances set in 18th century Wales, the better you'll get at writing humorous romances set in 18th century Wales. And I mean like set in the country Wales, not like inside a whale. Although romance can be a very specific genre, so that might be a thing. It's hard to see how anything else, while it would improve your writing overall, is going to improve it as much as specifically writing humorous romances set in 18th century Wales. The wisdom, or at least the belief here, is that the person who has spent more time writing a specific genre or type of story is going to be better at that type than someone who's mainly been practicing something else. This notion is perhaps best summed up in the oft-quoted 10,000 hour rule, which states that achieving mastery in any field requires 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. A rule that was popularized, although not coined, by Malcolm Gladwell in the popular book Outliers. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the more specific you get with what you are doing in those 10,000 hours, the better. So the rule would tell us that 10,000 hours plus specificity yields the best results. There are of course issues with this whole rule, mainly the fact that it is based on one study that looked at 20 to 24-year-old violin players, and 10,000 hours just happens to be around how many hours an elite player has practiced by the time they get to that age. And if you look at 30 to 35-year-old violin players, you'll get a different number, and that the original study that Gladwell quotes doesn't even make mention of 10,000 hours, and if you run the math on what they say, the number comes out closer to 25,000 hours. And that's skipping the massive assumption that violin playing will translate to literally any other area based on the people who promote this rule. So the 10,000 hour rule, combined with the concept of specificity, would state that deliberate practice in one specific area of writing is the best way to get better at that specific area.
Wow! That's his disagreement squeak.
I agree. I mean, disagree. Well, I agree about the dodginess of the 10,000 hour rule. The most compelling counterargument to this whole deliberate practice, 10,000 hour rule specificness is best described in the book Range by David Epstein. In Range, the author outlines how many successful people have gone through what he describes as a sampling period, where they amass practice across a wide area of domains, often unrelated to where they end up finding success. This gives them an incredible breadth of knowledge across a wide variety of areas, which can be a potent counterbalance to the kind of hyper-specialization espoused by Gladwell and the 10,000 Hour Club. As specialists dig themselves deeper into a very specific hole, they can lose sight of what's going on around them and miss potential connections or ideas that would be clear to a generalist. Someone who's dabbled in a dozen different genres might be able to leap into a new genre and bring a refreshing voice. They might better see new directions their story can go in a way that the specialists in that genre may have never saw. A lot of what determines whether a generalist versus a specialist approach works comes down to the type of learning environment we're talking about. Specifically, whether it's a wicked learning environment or a kind learning environment. Generalists tend to do better in wicked learning environments because their breadth of experience has made them used to uncertainty and discomfort, whereas specialists will hold on to their tools even once they stop working. Kind learning environments tend to be constrained. The same patterns recur over and over. Feedback is immediate, and generally the choices you have before you are quite clear. You do something and you immediately see the consequences and can adjust your strategy based on all of the information available. Chess is a kind learning environment. Golf is also a kind learning environment. In both of these situations, you have all of the information and it's accurate. The rules are very constrained. There's immediate feedback. And generally, strategies that worked in the past will tend to produce the same results in the future. Wicked learning environments, on the other hand, often have hidden or incomplete or straight up wrong information. Feedback is delayed, patterns might not repeat or they might change. A strategy that worked last time around might fail this time because of reasons that no one can predict. These environments are constantly evolving as well in a way that something like chess doesn't. Wicked environments aren't necessarily harder than the kind ones, they just require a different approach to mastery. The stock market is an example of a wicked learning environment, as is most human communication and interaction. Dating is a wicked learning environment. Most geopolitical conflicts are wicked, as is crime scene investigation. The plots and conflicts of stories often take place in wicked learning environments, but writing itself is also one hell of a wicked environment. Different readers will react differently to different scenes. Well-used plot lines can become stale and not as effective. How you foreshadowed events early in your story will affect how later events land with the reader. You're dealing with the ever-changing whims of human emotion in order to get the point of your story across, and this depends on so many factors that it's impossible to predict. Hell, if someone's in a bad mood when they read your story, then that could totally affect their impression of it. And this doesn't even account for trying to publish and sell stories. You think the stock market's wicked? Have you looked at the literary market? You can reuse someone else's chess strategy and potentially get similar results, but if you try to publish Game of Thrones word for word, people will hate it. Even if you make basic changes to it, you'll probably get called out. Reusing the same strategy when it comes to writing without flexibility and alteration simply won't work most of the time, and this is where people who have become entrenched in one way of thinking will flounder. Good writers need to be innovative. They need to take previously explored concepts and ideas and present them in ways that are simultaneously novel, but also familiar enough that readers can connect with them. These sorts of demands really lend themselves to a generalist who can assimilate many different viewpoints across different areas to really create something. So what are the takeaways from all of this? I'd love to tell you, but I don't have 10,000 hours practice in coming up with takeaways, so there is a balance between specialization and generalization, between specificity and casting a wider net, between really digging into one specific area and throwing a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Writing does have some kind elements to its learning environment, basic things like spelling and grammar, of course, but also plot structures and the like. But the great writers often go beyond this kind of environment and make connections that make readers go, oh, and ah, and I will say that if you have a goal of writing a specific genre or style, a short story, novel, novella, flash, whatever, then yes, deliberate, concentrated practice in that style should compose the bulk of your time. However, time outside of that area is not a waste and may actually be quite beneficial. This doesn't mean jumping between projects without finishing anything, but rather trying new things even if they are unfamiliar or scary. Having one leg outside of your comfort zone is not a bad thing. There's a dark side to specificity, this idea that if you don't start early and practice hard on whatever you've decided on, then you're not going to have success. This idea that only after years of work in one very specific area can you produce anything worthwhile can be quite discouraging. I worry that this could make somebody stick with something that isn't right for them. Maybe when you started your writing journey, you thought mysteries were the bomb. Perhaps specifically mysteries about bombs in 18th century Wales. But after writing a few novels like that, maybe you've grown sick of them, and there's a sparkly new genre on the horizon that you want to give a try. The 10,000 hour rule would say don't jump ship, you won't be good enough to move on to something else. And to that I say, take a leap into the unfamiliar. But keep an eye on the X that you're ultimately headed for.